Hi, and welcome to Long Lost Friends. I'm Andrea Goyan.
And I'm Elizabeth Eve King. Today, our guest is Cindy O'Quinn. Cindy is an Appalachian writer who grew up in the mountains of West Virginia. She writes fiction, nonfiction, and speculative poetry, all of which sort of leans into the horror genre. Uh, it was with Cindy's fifth Bram Stoker Award nomination that she garnered a win in 2024, the prestigious award, and her poetry has also been nominated for the Riesling, I never know how to say that, Riesling, Elgin, and Dorf Star Awards. Welcome, Cindy.
Thank y'all so much. I'm tickled to death to be here with y'all today.
We love having you, and we always like to start off seeing people's pets if
Okay.
they have them, and I know you
Here,
do.
Boomer.
So show us
Okay. Here is Boomer. Boomer,
Boomer.
can you see him?
I saw
There
it.
he is.
Yes. Oh, he's a cutie.
He
And
is
he's wagging
really
his
cute.
Oh,
tail for us.
What a good boy.
oh,
That is
You were
adorable.
saying how big he is. He's the same size as one of my dogs, so I
yeah.
appreciate the giant lap dog that you have.
Yes. And he does think he's a lap dog. He's always climbing up in the recliner with my youngest son and laying on his chest and falling asleep. So, oh,
Is
That's
is Boomer still there? We apparently we didn't get a good look at him.
okay.
He was just a
Let me get
shadow.
him to come back.
he was a wagging, he had a shadow, had a wagging tail though.
Okay.
Let's see.
Give me a
There he
Boomer.
is.
Hey,
Boomer.
Boomer.
Boomer
Oh,
and your animal wrangler.
yes.
Everybody needs
Oh,
one.
Well, we are so happy you're here with us. And
Yes.
well, I'm glad to be here with y'all.
So I hear that you moved recently back to West Virginia after living and homesteading in the
Yes.
wilds of northern Maine. So
Yes.
I have so many questions about that.
yeah,
First, what was it like? And also, you mentioned that you sort of started writing and submitting, and Andrea and I have been wondering, how did you have time to do anything but, can food and raise
get food
goats
on the table.
and children?
Right. Um, well, I've always written, but I never felt moved to submit anywhere. And it wasn't until we moved 1,000 miles from home and moved to that homestead um, that I was like, okay, maybe I am brave enough to send this stuff out in the world to see if anybody else wants to read it or buy it or whatever. So it was in 2016, whenever we moved, just a couple months after we moved to Maine, that I sold my first novelette. And
Wow.
then I just kept going from there because, I had a lot of stories already, that I had wrote. And so I just started submitting and sometimes I would get lucky and they would get purchased and published and um so yeah I stayed busy there especially the summer. It was such a short season there. It was like less than half the length that a typical summer is like here in West Virginia, this far south. So whenever sometimes we would have to wait until near the end of June before we could even plant our gardens because the soil took so long to get to temperature up there. But whenever we did plant, the season came on like a boom, and the gardens always flourished. We had herb gardens, we had blueberry bushes. Sometimes we would get 75 quarts a year of blueberries to freeze to have, throughout the winter. We had apple trees. It was when we decided, my husband was older than me, and whenever he decided to retire, um, him and me and our two sons, Elijah and Zach, the four of us sit down together. And Tim had always wanted to live in the cabin in the woods. And we went through all the states, and narrowed it down, and everybody agreed on Maine. We hadn't planned on moving that far north in Maine. I wanted to stay within like 30 minutes of Bangor so we'd be near civilization. But we wanted to look at one more homestead on that last night there looking at properties. And when we drove through the opening, it was like stepping back in time 200 years. And Tim and I had often said we were born a century or two too late because we liked the older, simpler ways of living, providing for yourself, growing, canning, knowing what you were eating. And so once we pulled in, we're like, well, this is it. It's 2.5 hours further north than what we had intended on. But it was already a working homestead, a Mennonite working homestead, and the homesteader
Okay.
was a widow at that time, and it was too much for her to do. So she kept a little bit of the property, and her children built her a little granny cottage. And we kind of brought it into the 21st century, by adding hot running water to the kitchen sink. And, I had to learn the art of cooking on a wood cook stove. And we tried to keep it as simple as possible. So we didn't have a dryer. We had a fancy indoor clothesline, which it was a cabin with lofts where the boys slept, and across there were clotheslines, and which was above the wood stove in the living room, and they dried quicker than if you put them in the dryer. And then in the warm months, we had the outdoor clothesline. So it kept me busy. It kept me moving, going up and down the steps and all that. And as far as learning the wood stove cooking, it was a learning lesson. You had to finally, get to the point where you knew if you wanted to fry something and it was something simple, you would use soft wood like pine. But if you wanted to bake something, roast something that would take hours, like turkey or something, you would have to use like a hardwood, maple, oak, something like that. So I don't regret any of that, because I feel like it's becoming a dying art, knowing how to process food, how to grow food, how to grow it organically without all the chemicals. And we grew our own vegetables, fruits, meats. We did it all. And it was something that so many young people, especially, don't have the opportunity to learn. So for Elijah and Zach, they were, let's see, 16 and 20 when we moved there. So they got to experience all of that and they have all of that knowledge now. And Elijah, at age 13, he became so interested in herbs. He's 28 now. So 15 years he's been studying herbs. While we lived on the homestead, he even went to a clinical herbalist school. And now he's a clinical herbalist, which he could open his own practice. But he said, Mom, I did this for the family. It's our homestead medicine, you know, because a couple of the years while we were there, we didn't have health insurance. So we didn't go to the doctor. So anytime anybody got sick, had headache, had allergies, had pain, Elijah had the tincture or could make a compress or um, whatever we needed that eldest, we had it there stockpiled.
So did you know how to do some of these, like you're saying, canning and those things before you went there? Was that something you'd done?
It- Growing up, we always had a big garden, and my mom canned, so I was um, already knew how to do it, but not to that extent.
Yeah.
How
So,
big was oh, sorry, how big was the property?
20 acres. And there was only about 4 acres that were open, and that was more than enough for us to have our chickens and pigs and turkeys and rabbits and 2 of the sweetest milk goats you could ever imagine. So it was plenty of room for all of that. And then we had 16 acres of wood, fortunately, because in northern Maine, it's not like the coastal pretty Maine that you think about. It's beautiful up there, but more than likely you're surrounded by tater fields. It's like the Northeast tater capital of the world. And even just 2 or 3 years ago, when Idaho ran low on potatoes, potatoes, the Idaho potatoes you would get in the store had came from Aroostook County, Maine, because they had an excess, so they would ship their potatoes to Idaho. Um, so anyway, I was thankful for the woods because I didn't want to look outside and see nothing but flat tater fields. So we were kind of secluded. You couldn't see us from the road. People didn't know we were there. Um, and they weren't even familiar. If I said we lived on Bell's Crossing, so many people didn't have a clue where that was. But if I said the Tessier Homestead, they knew exactly where it was because that family had been there for 35 years, homesteading before we came into the picture.
So
Did
then
you
if you
did you
got
have
to,
electricity? I don't know
oh,
this.
no, I was gonna say, so you were saying the summer months and the harvesting was very busy. When you got to the winter, was that when you really had time to write?
I would write throughout all year long, but the winters, yes, that was the downtime. Um, like I say, summer was not only the harvest, but that was the time whenever you had to harvest wood and get it dried out enough because we heated with wood only. We had a fireplace, a wood stove, and the wood cook stove, and it took 7 cords a year to heat the home. That's whole lot of wood. So that that really was the busiest, hardest time of the year. Now, in the winter, what kept my husband busy was he would have to plow full time. I mean, it was like an everyday job. And when that first winter there, we were not prepared for 200 inches of snow in one season. Um, so whenever we would go out, we were like, why is everybody plowing not just their driveway, they're plowing their entire yards. We quickly found out that if you didn't push the snow clear back to the woods, you would get closed in. You could, until you just had like barely a path for your vehicle. So that first winter there, our neighbors had pity on us. They had a big front load, one of those big heavy duty equipment, front end loader, something. Um, and they came up and like pushed all of our snow back in like 5 minutes. So we knew after the first winter what we needed to do.
So
Uh-huh.
you mentioned having a lot of animals and doing your own meats. Did you basically have to slaughter and dry all the meat before winter came?
Um, well, for the majority, yes. We did have um, what is the word I'm trying to think of? We dispatched the pigs ourselves, but we took them to a slaughterhouse for them to process. But as far as and I don't want to offend anybody who doesn't eat meat, and it sounds kind of cruel, but you go to the grocery store and you buy meat. We didn't go to the grocery store, we raised it. So, but we had meat chickens, meat turkeys, and meat rabbits. And yes, we processed them there right on the homestead under a big shade tree. And I either canned the meat or froze it. And yeah, that's what we did.
I
And
don't
as far
can't
as the
eat.
sweet little milk goats that we had, they were La Mancha goats. They hardly have any ears, which is perfect for northern Maine because you don't want anything to get frostbite, which we kind of spoiled our animals anyway. We had heat lamps and everything in the barn to keep everybody toasty, but they had been raised by a teenage girl that was in FHA, or FFA, Future Farmers of America, and they had the big horns and everything, but they were the gentlest goats, Laverne and Shirley. All of our animals ended up being named after TV characters. My husband did that. So it was Laverne and Shirley. And the only thing we did to that milk was because I've had goat's milk from the store that's been processed and I can't handle that. But the only thing we did to them was the boys would milk the goats, bring in the milk, and I would run it through like either a cheesecloth or coffee filter 2 or 3 times and chill it down real quick. And that was the sweetest, best milk to drink, to cook with. I mean, it was just amazing.
Did you make cheese too?
Yes, we made cheese. I really wasn't fond of the goat cheese, but my eldest was. So yes, we did make goat cheese. We had it hanging in the kitchen. What was it through like a pantyhose or something where you had to keep squeezing the moisture out. So we learned how to do all kinds of things while we were there. So yeah, I feel fortunate for that time
Do you,
there.
And
do you
were you
find
able
that a lot of
to,
this, Elizabeth and I have so many questions. Do you find that a lot of what you did there um, comes into your writing?
It does. Yes. Um, just about all of my writing is rooted in West Virginia because I've been here the longest. I lived in West Virginia. I've lived in Virginia for about, let's see, a couple different occasions, 15 years and then 4 years, but then 8 years on the homestead. So the majority is rooted in West Virginia, but there were so many that were born in Maine on that homestead, you know? So, I mean, it was like the day that we moved there. We were spitting distance from the Canadian border. There was an old border crossing which was closed 2 miles at the end of our lane. And there are gray wolves in Canada. And, I don't think they know about borders. And I really felt like there was a wolf on the homestead, but I felt like it was watching over me. I may sound silly, but that that feeling that I had of him always being there led me to write a story. Started out being called King's Cross, and eventually it turned into a longer story called Dire Brook. But yeah, that whole thing, was born there on the homestead, and Bangor was included, and a lot of the stories will have a RN nurse in it, at which I've been a nurse for 20 some years. So it's like all of my life experiences. A lot of writers don't put nonfiction in their work. Well, mine is all born from nonfiction, from experiences that I've had, even if it's just a sentence that gets me started. It's something that has happened in my life or that I've seen, and the story grows from there, and I add the supernatural to it. So there's
I
the
think
bits
that's
of
what makes it real and relatable, is that
yeah,
it is real, and then I mean, I think
yeah.
that's and unique too.
Yeah. Sometimes I think if people knew just how much truth was in some of these stories, it might scare them a little bit. But, you know, yeah, growing up in West Virginia, you saw a lot of things. For instance, whenever the submission call came out for the Bad Book, edited by John F.D. Taft, put out by, don't want to get the name of the publisher wrong, Bleeding Edge Books, I believe. And that came out. My husband was still alive at the time. And the premise was you had to take a Bible story and turn it into a horror story. And I'm like, well, what would my family think about that? I don't think I'll be submitting to that one. And anyway, about a week later, John F.D. Taft reaches out to me and invites me to write a story for it. My husband just about died laughing. And I'm like, well, what am I supposed to do with that? So what did I do? I took a little bit of my experience in West Virginia. I often talk about this mountaintop called Glace, a real place, the real actual little old church that I went to whenever I was a child, and they would have revivals, and people, would come, and there would be people talking in tongues and flailing around on the floor, and things like that. So that story was born of that, and it was about a little girl that was her life, and but she was gifted, and she went to this timber frame structure for a gathering, is what they called them. And whenever a man opened the door and started to come inside, it was like she could smell his wickedness. And she knew right away he was not a healer. And he did not have good intentions. His intentions were to take advantage of these Appalachian people that worked so hard for a living. And hope, which was holding on, there wasn't a lot of it. So when there was the little shimmer of hope, they clung to it, and they would line up and, get their healing or whatever. So she knew he was bad. And, when that happens, you know, the Appalachian people don't take too kindly, and he was taken care of. And he bothered no one else ever again.
So when we were both Elizabeth and I were looking to become more familiar with your work before we sat down with you, we went online and s- didn't find anything. Do you have anything online that's available online? I mean, we've got anthologies and things, but do you have any
Uh-huh.
online pieces? I
That
couldn't
are
find them.
like free to
Yeah,
read.
like from magazines and things online that you can.
Well, in the beginning, whenever I first started submitting, like I say, I got lucky the first time, in a novelette called The Handshake was bought. But there was a magazine called Blood Moon Rising, and you didn't get paid, but it came out as a online magazine that you could read for free, and they accepted um, right many of my poems, I believe. I'm not sure about the stories, um, and I don't know if there's any stories online to read for free. Um, Bewildering Stories had accepted one called Loss of Control. So that one may be online somewhere. It eventually got published again through Horror Writers of Maine, Northern Frights. G.D. Dearborn purchased that. So it came out again, in a book. But yeah.
I have a question. I have
Okay.
questions.
Yay.
I actually have 4 questions. Did you put electricity into the house then? Was there?
It it
Okay.
had electricity. It did have I am spoiled for electricity. So it
Oh,
had electricity. It just didn't have um there was running water to the kitchen sink, but the previous homesteader preferred to heat up the water on the wood cook stove to do her dishes and stuff. We did have a plumber come in and work on all of that so we could have hot water everywhere. And we went for about a year and a half, and 2 years, and I strictly used the wood cook stove. I used the clotheslines in the inside and out. When we stayed away from adding cable, you know. But eventually, little by little, we started adding in more and more conveniences. So we eventually got a dryer and we got internet and all of that sort of stuff. So, you know, we had all the modern conveniences by when it was all said and done.
Because you'd need internet to submit, wouldn't you?
Yes, if I didn't want to have to go to town, to a gas station that had free Wi-Fi, um, we needed it. And that was another struggle because we were so secluded. Even whenever we did get the satellite dishes, um, they didn't work very well. So it was sometimes I would still have to go to town to have enough service to be able to do my emails and submissions and all.
Wow, that must have been hard in the winter.
It was, yeah.
Were you able to keep the egg layers through the winter in a barn enough?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
they were always in a chicken coop. We let them out each day into a chicken run, so nothing would get to them. But like I say, we pretty much spoiled all the animals. We kept them all warm and toasty inside the barn throughout the winter, and then and I don't even want to say spring because we really didn't have a spring. It went from winter to mud season straight into summer.
ah,
So whenever the thaw eventually happened and all the snow was gone, then we were able to let the goats and the chickens and everything back outside. And then our meat birds, my youngest son made little chicken tractors, poultry tractors that we would move around like under the apple orchard and throughout the yard and stuff a couple times a day. So they got all their fresh air and everything too.
Oh, nice. Mud season sounds kind of like a horror story right there.
Sometimes it was more difficult to get through that mud than it was the snow and ice. It would
Yeah.
get that bad, yeah.
Cindy,
Wow.
do you write on a computer or by hand?
Mostly on the laptop. I do take a lot of notes on my phone. I'll put it, when ideas hit, I'll put them on the phone. And I have, I don't know, about 100 notebooks laying around where I have, partial stories in, partial novellas and novels. So, yeah, there's a lot of notes everywhere. But whenever it comes down to it, I do it on the computer.
Cool. Yeah.
So Andrea and I were also talking. You've been nominated for so many things and won, which is wonderful. But it's unusual for somebody to be so far out, and and not and get those kind of nominations. How do you know? Did the magazine, or I guess anthology, submit? Was it like a big surprise?
Publishers or yeah.
Well, I don't know how I ended up so fortunate, but I was this invisible, reclusive writer, tucked away on this homestead, and I didn't go to conventions. I didn't do readings. I didn't do any of that stuff because I well, my husband and I were really private, and I'm really shy. So I didn't venture away from the homestead. And whenever I finally did get to go to Stoker Con, my very first trip across the country to the West Coast, that was such a huge deal for me. I was scared to death to be traveling that far from home alone, and it just blew my mind. I couldn't help but get so tickled. But so many people that I met at SocerCon, which everybody was so kind, but whenever they would meet me, so many would say, "You are real. You're not this robot living on a pretend homestead in the woods of northern Maine. You're actually a real person." So I got a kick out of that, because I guess I was so reclusive that people maybe wondered, was this a real person?
It's funny
But
that you say, oh, I was going to say,
yeah,
it's funny you say how nice people were, because I always tell my husband that the horror writers are the nicest people I've met.
yes.
They are
And,
the most generous.
I didn't think I would ever be on social media, but whenever we did move, we were living in Virginia at the time. Whenever my husband retired and we moved to the homestead, oh, I started jonesing for my mountains so bad, and seeing people from back home that the boys put Facebook on my phone so I could, see friends, see family, see my mountains. And so, you know, I don't know where I was going with that. Um,
So
I'm not thinking,
because yeah, I mean, so many writers now, it's like all these different social media things, and it's
yes,
constant, and you have managed to not do that.
yeah. Um, I, I feel I don't feel like I'm any kind of fancy writer or anything. I'm a storyteller, and that started before I could read or write. Um, on Sunday afternoons, we would go to my great grandmother's house on that mountain that I often talk about, and I was really shy. And I didn't want to go outside and play with all the cousins. I wanted to stay inside and be quite invisible as all of these elders would tell stories. And there wasn't a lot of books in any of these houses. It was their life experiences that they had been through, and old wives' tales, and just so much history that I fell in love with it. And like I say, I started telling stories before I could read or write. And whenever my mom and dad and I would go for rides, I would find something along the way and I would make up a story about it. And sometimes I would start out, well, at school, the teacher told us about this. And I would go on and on for the entire ride. And about the time we would get home, I would say, that was just a story. And they were like, my mom would say, Cynthia, we never know when to believe you. But anyway, and then once I got in school and um, started writing, but I never dreamed of letting go of any of it. because it always felt so personal to me that I was too stingy to share my
Uh,
thoughts and stuff with the world.
it's the
So,
best kind of writing, the personal stuff. Um,
yeah.
you mentioned in one of the articles I read about you that it was your mom that really got your
Yes,
sparked your love of horror.
yes. This sweet, beautiful little woman here.
Closer. Bring
Okay,
it up so we can
okay. Am I
higher
in the
a
right
little,
spot?
a little bit.
Okay, where do
Over.
I need to be? Right here? Is that
Yep.
there?
Actually, you're too low now.
Yeah,
There,
you
that's better. That's better.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes. This wonderful woman named Janetta Mae Webb O'Quinn, um, the most wonderful, kind, generous woman in the world that just spread so much love and joy. I mean, half the town called her Granny, and she had an eighth grade education. She got married when she was 17 and started having us girls, but she was so smart about so many different things. Whether it was electronical things, it was if she wanted to paint something, if she wanted to carve something, if she wanted to crochet or quilt, she was so talented. I mean, who else could take a peach seed and turn it into a basket without breaking it? She was just
Wow.
so patient. And like on Saturday nights, the tradition was, I'd had two older sisters. They would be off on dates or with their friends having fun, and my dad would be playing cards with his friends, and that left me and mom. And she loved to watch movies. She loved watching horror movies, and I was only 6 years old, probably. Whenever she started taking me to the drive-in and seeing movies, like I say, I've mentioned it before: Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Exorcist, and It's Alive and It Lives Again, all those horror movies of the 70s and, early 80s, and it is such wonderful memories that s I just love it that she instilled that into me in such a young age, and then around age 10, my best friend of 48 years now, who lives directly across the street, um, she came into the picture. So on Saturday nights, it would be me, mom, and Deanna. And, Deanna really didn't like horror movies, she'd keep her eyes shut half the time, and then when we'd get home, we'd be in bed that night, and I'd, just terrify her, I would tell her I just know there is a hand crawling up by the bed, and she'd start squealing. Mom would come in to see what in the world was I doing, She's like, "Quit torturing that child."
Did you have
You were
nightmares?
just practicing. What?
That's right. Um, I only had, and even movies like The Exorcist, when I think back, I've watched it, since, and I think, oh, there's so many scary parts. But as a child, the only thing that scared me was that noise she heard in the attic, thinking there were rats in the attic. That's what stuck with me. And for Texas Chainsaw Massacre, all the blood and gore for all of that, what scared me was I think he was a very young man who played the grandpa scared me whenever, they were saying, "Whack her again, grandpa, whack her again," trying to hit this woman in the head to bleed her out in a bucket. That scared me. That man that played grandpa. And like I say, just recently I found out it was a really, really young man that played that role, but he did a good job.
So you've got some exciting things coming up for you.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, we'd love to hear about the new version of a book that you had published
Mhm.
earlier that's coming out.
Yes.
What's going on
Wow.
in its life?
Yeah.
Dark Cloud on Necka Creek, is up for pre-order in Kindle, and I think any day it'll be, available for pre-order in paperback.
The
It's
links
coming
will
out.
be below. I'm just gonna put in a little plug here. Okay, go on.
Um, um, what I think I'll tell you how a couple of people have commented, "Ooh, that's a cool name, cool title for a book." And I'd mentioned later on, I'll tell you how that title came to be. another true life event. And back in 1996, we were living in Waynesboro, Virginia, and I worked at Merck. I was a basic chemical operator, and I was on my way to work and on Route 340 North, headed to Elkton. And each day I had to cross the bridge over Naked Creek. Well, on one particular day, the clouds were so dark, so ominous, that I actually said out loud, "Wow, the clouds are really hanging dark, over Naked Creek today." And that's where Dark Cloud on Naked Creek, the title, came to be. And but it wasn't time for me to write it. I hadn't lived enough first. I hadn't went to school to become an RN. I hadn't worked in a men's prison. And all of those things had to happen over the next 20 years before I could write that book. So,
Wait, I have to ask you, did you work in a men's prison before you were an RN?
nope. I worked jobs like I worked at DuPont, I worked at Merck, I worked really physical jobs in industrial plants. And whenever we had our children, which that was an 8-year process, and I'm very blessed that we have our two sons. Um, I knew I would eventually want to go back to West Virginia, but on mine and Tim's first date, he said, "I need to stay in Waynesboro with my mom until she passes because I made that promise when I was 11 years old when his father died." And I admired him for that. But I told him, I said, "Now, if something were to happen to my parents before then, I may be a little bit bitter." And he made sure to take us home to West Virginia once or twice a month, like one weekend a month or every other weekend, even, to make sure I kept that connection. But anyway, once we had our children, his mom was well into her 80s and her health started going downhill. And I decided, okay, now's the time for me to go back to school. I'd always wanted to be a nurse. So I think Zach was not even a year old yet, and Elijah was 3, and I went back to school. And Tim and I we worked opposite shifts to make sure, they didn't have to go to a babysitter. It was a strain on us. We didn't see each other as much, but we wanted to raise them. We wanted, but anyway, we had a good friend that lived one street older that we used to work with. And whenever we did need somebody, she would watch them for a few hours. But I went back to school, and on that first day home from class, they climbed up in my lap whenever I opened a textbook to start studying. Day one, I closed that book, and for the 3 years that it took for me to become an RN, I set my clock for 3 a.m. every day. I got up, and that's when I did my studies, and I graduated from both programs, top of the class, and it didn't take any time away from the boys. I got less sleep, but I got through it. So I had my career set for when we did move back to West Virginia because, jobs aren't very plentiful, not the way they are in Waynesboro, Virginia. So we moved back, and I worked as an RN. Started out in a hospital, as one should, med surge and peds and all of that. And eventually I ended up working in correctional centers, which, was a shock to a lot of people, especially one of my instructors, because whenever we did do clinicals and visited a prison, she said the look on my face whenever they put us in one of those cells and slammed that door shut, the look on my face was like, I know Cindy will never work in a prison. Well, that's where I ended up working. And because I enjoyed the autonomy, I didn't have to rely on anybody else. We had our set of protocols, and we had to rely on our own skills. And I never had trouble working in a prison because I'm a very empathetic person, and I tend to treat everyone the same, with the same respect, whether it was the warden that walked in with an injury or an offender who walked in with an injury. I was respectful, and they were always respectful to me. Now, there's a lot of people out there in that field, whether it's a nurse, correctional officer, whatever, that maybe shouldn't be because they get kind of this power trip thing going on, and they talk down to people, and they're the ones that have trouble, you know? So anyway, it wasn't a bad experience working in prison for me because I treated everybody the same, just with respect.
Wow. So did that influence your writing too, I imagine?
It certainly did, because one of those prisons um, is very similar to the prison that's in Dark Cloud on Naked Creek. It was that prison used to be an old tuberculosis hospital, and it was on the outskirts of town, because in the middle of nowhere, because people probably didn't want to see such a facility. And it was a tuberculosis hospital for African American people. So this place was kind of hidden away. Well, it was that. It remained a hospital like that for years, and then it shut down. It reopened as a nursing home, shut down again, and a decade or so later, they reopened it as a correctional center. And it was, I think, 3 or 4 stories tall, and the windows, it seemed like the windows were like 6 feet high. And whenever I would stand in the window in the medical unit and look out, there would be men playing baseball, well, softball. I'm not sure if they were allowed to play baseball or not, but the main reason for that is because of injuries. And there was one rule that they could never slide into base because, somebody had broken a leg or something. So there were rules, and there was a track, and I believe there was even croquet there. So whenever you looked out over the property, if they didn't have uniforms on, you would have thought you were at a really old-timey resort. And I never used the elevator because it was kind of scary. It was one of those big freight elevators that you had to, pull the gates down and everything. And I stayed away from those unless I had to be on one, with another medical provider. And I always took the steps, but I made sure that I always counted the floors, because I knew medical was on the 3rd floor. Well, one day I made a mistake and went an extra flight up. So when I got to the top of the steps, here I am at the wrong end of the hall, and I have to walk. And it wasn't cells they were in; it was like bedrooms with regular doors. I had to walk down that long hall, which looked like it was a mile away before I would get to that correctional officer that was sitting at a desk outside of medical. And, it was like, okay, I dare not want to even look into any rooms or anything, because you never knew what you were going to see. You didn't want touching doorknobs. You didn't want to do anything like that because you didn't know what was going on. But that maybe a partial scene of that may even be in Dark Cloud on Naked Creek. But yeah, it was, it, the book wouldn't be had it not been for me working at Merck and riding over that bridge at Naked Creek every day, and then eventually going to school to be an RN. The book would not have played out the way it did.
Is there a
So,
nurse character in it?
Pardon?
Is there a nurse character in it?
Absolutely. She is the main character, at Nurse Afton Sullivan. Afton is the main character, and she's gifted. She doesn't like to lay hands on the offenders because when she does, she sees what they've done in the past. She sees what they have planned for the future. And when
Mm.
she sees these things, especially if it's something that they have planned that they're going to do whenever they get released, she doesn't want them to be released. And whenever, inmates start dying, she's wondering, okay, am I doing this? So a couple more characters come into the picture, and she ends up having to go deeper into the mountains of West Virginia to find out what it is about herself, her history, um, to know how special she is.
And you recently released something about this moving toward becoming a film. Can you share that with us?
Yes. I was invited to a movie set. Um, uh, I don't know if it's been a year and a half or so ago. A movie that was being filmed in Pennsylvania, and I was invited by my friend Dwayne to come and stay for 2 weeks and see how a movie is made. And while there, I met the movie star Kathy Moriarty and her daughter, who happens to be a screenwriter, Bella Gentile. And they welcomed me with open arms. The entire cast treated me like family. And when Bella discovered that I was a horror writer, she was intrigued and she wanted to read some of my work. And so she started reading Dark Cloud on Naked Creek, and she's like, "Oh no, Mom needs to read this too." So they each had a copy of the original, and they started reading it. And Bella would leave the book on her mom's pillow at night to make sure they both were on the same page, keeping up with this. Because Kathy, she has a production company. She's had one for decades, and they fell in love with the book. And so I opted to sign on with Kathy and Bella for Bella to be the screenwriter. And Kathy wants to star in the movie. So it's currently with a couple different production companies. And so fingers crossed that
Fingers crossed.
I
Yeah.
will hear good news and be able to share that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
So,
That's so
yeah.
exciting. It's so funny too. It's like you hardly ever venture out, but when you do,
But when
um,
I
how-
do,
yeah. But you
good
said that
news.
she had her own production company, so couldn't she
Um,
produce it? Or
she could, but since she wants to star in it, I think she would rather for it to be um, with maybe a bigger production company
now,
than
when
what
you
she
get
has.
to work, are you going to work on the script a little too? I mean, go back.
Bella's already finished the screenplay. It's already finished, and it's currently with people. Um, one in particular that fell in love with it. So we'll see
Good.
what happens. Yeah,
Okay,
Such a
but
process.
yeah,
Such a
but
process.
hopefully the three of us will each be a producer on the film, and we will get to be there every day together. Because, like I
Lovely.
say, once we connected, we felt like family. We've, we're like sisters now. And it's like whenever Kathy met me, she's like, you could be my sister. And I'm like, well, we could do that, but I don't think I want to talk on screen.
oh,
Oh, me.
I don't know. You're doing fine. You can
yeah.
talk on
Oh,
screen. You
me.
have got because
I
you're
think you
such a natural storyteller. You spin yarns all the time. So it's just you always have something to talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, you are definitely a natural storyteller.
Yeah,
It's
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 lovely.
it's it's lovely and it's surprisingly not that usual for writers. I mean, we've talked to a lot of writers and they don't talk like it's a story. They don't
Yeah.
draw you in, where you see the long hall and the doorknobs and everything
Yeah.
and start going, oh my gosh, I'm going to have nightmares.
Y'all are very kind. Thank you so much.
Well, Cindy, you also have an extraordinary life story. It's so wonderful to just sit and listen to everything you have done because it's really extraordinary from most of our points of view. Um,
Well, I have to
lovely.
tell you about Linda D. Addison. I don't know if I'm
Oh,
allowed to talk about a project that I've recently, read of some of y'all, but Linda D. Addison was the first person in the horror community to connect with me and converse with me. And then it was her, and then right after was Patricia Gomes, who's a wonderful writer, poet. She was poet laureate in Biddeford, Massachusetts for years. But there's Linda. What can I say about Linda? You know, she is my goddess of words, of poetry. And the thing about Linda is I had never heard her talk. And I might get emotional, but in Dark Cloud Creek is a woman named Nola Mae Waters. And she had this beautiful voice. And it was like, as I wrote about Nola Mae, it was like I could hear that voice as clear as a bell. Well, in 2017, Linda is on YouTube, not reciting one of her poems. She is performing it. And when I heard her voice, I broke down and cried because that was Nola Mae Waters' voice from my book. So I reached out to her through Messenger and I thought, oh, I hope she doesn't think I'm kind of a stalker fan or anything, but I have to share this with her. And she was nothing but flattered. And, and then years later, I went on to nonfiction piece about, it was like a final kiss to my husband. Nonfiction, real nonfiction is difficult because if I do write it, it's going to be about something horrendous. And a friend of mine, Steph Ellis, read it and she wrote a found poem from that story. And I was blown away by her poem based on my story, One and Done, that Steph and I started talking. And I said, ooh, this is really cool. Wouldn't it be cool to write a whole book of found poetry of your favorite poet, by your favorite poet? And I'm like, I call Linda Addison. And she said, well, I call Alessandro Manzetti. And I'm like, but I don't want to tell him until we're finished, because if it's not something that I feel proud of, I don't even want him to know about it. So when we finished writing it, which never in my life has something flowed so magically. I mean, how could it not with Linda and Alessandro's poems? When I was finished, I sent Linda a message and said, Linda, I've been up to something. And I told her what we had done and sent it to her. And she said, that is the biggest honor of my life, for y'all to have been so inspired that y'all wrote an entire collection of poems based on mine and Alessandro's work. And they each wrote a beautiful introduction for it. And it went on. And I don't think I had mentioned that to y'all before, we talked about doing this interview, but the name of it is Foundlings. And I believe it's considered self-published. Steph Ellis took care of, getting it up on Amazon. And it went on, I think it was probably, it was on the recommended reading list, and it went on to be nominated for an Elgin Award. And I think it's a collection that not enough people have read. Because, like I say, how can you go wrong with the magic that Linda and Alessandro had whenever they did a collection together and then their works separately? And I haven't seen a red cent from it. And I know I've bought plenty of copies, myself at full price, because I sent everyone who blurbed it all over the country, I sent them a copy. So I'll probably never make any money off of it because I spent a fortune on, sending copies to everybody. But I would like to see that book
Well,
be noticed.
we'll put a
So
link below. But I beat you to it.
exactly.
Link below.
Link below and
Oh,
buy a copy,
yeah.
obviously.
And there's something else about Dark Cloud on Naked Creek. I did self-publish it in 2016 when I was so reclusive. I knew nothing about, okay, now what do I do with it? So it probably sold a couple hundred copies. And the majority of those copies were friends here in West Virginia and Virginia who bought it. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't go to conventions. I didn't do that sort of thing. So eventually I took it down, and there's no copies now. And but over the past 9 years, I've continued to work on that novel because in all stories, any story, it's never really done. Um, and it's become something else. And I thought, who would I trust to lend their voice to it, to edit it for me? And I could think of only one person, and that is the king of Southern fried horror himself, Ronald Kelly. And I reached out to him and I said, "Do you ever edit books?" He said, "Only my own." And I said, "Well, Thomas Tessier, I'll tell you about him here in a minute, but I'm wanting to get Dark Cloud on Naked Creek back out in the world, but I want someone with a similar voice as my own to edit it." And he wanted to do it for free. And I said, "There's no way I can let you do that." He said, "Well, you can pay me, but there's one stipulation. I get the right to introduction for it." And he did. And if you'll allow me just to read like a paragraph of it, every time I read his introduction, I am brought to tears. But I just want to read, if it's okay,
Yes, of course.
just like a paragraph. Okay, this is Ron Kelly's introduction to Dark Cloud on Naked Creek. "Reading the work of Cindy O'Quinn is like going home again. I must confess, I've never had the pleasure of visiting West Virginia, but I reckon it can't be that much different from my home state of Tennessee. The mountains, wooded hills, and hollows." Hollows. That's not a word that's in my vocabulary. For me, I grew up Sherman Holler. The only time I use the word hollow is maybe the hollowness I feel in my soul from time to time. But anyway, the music, folk, and bluegrass, if you want the purest kind, and of course the backbone of the land itself, the people who dwell there, folks you've grown up with or gone to church with all your life, as well as your kin, mothers and fathers, siblings, cousins, grandparents, the glue of DNA that binds us and holds the family together as strong as seasoned hickory. Speaking of kinship, I felt that way about Cindy the first time I read her story Quantum, which earned her a Bram Stoker Award for Best Short Fiction. As far as her prose was concerned, she struck me as a kindred spirit. I felt that even more whenever the first time I ever met her in person at AuthorCon in Virginia. It was like staring into the face of a long lost sister. Since then, she has often told me she was drawn to my Southern fried fiction as well because we shared that same voice. I wholeheartedly agree. Our brand of down home rural storytelling is drawn from the same well, creative waters that sometimes mystical and rejuvenating, while at other times bitter and tainted with strife. Country life can be blessed with treasures of the heart and soul, but it can also be wrought with the hard times, tragedy, and disillusionment. I believe in our own separate ways. Cindy and I have experienced our share of both. When she asked me to read Dark Cloud on Naked Creek, I praise its storyline and characters honestly. A fresh set of eyes. I jumped at the chance. What I found between the first page and the last was a blessing within itself. And it goes on, and it's quite the introduction. And I have never read such a beautiful one in my life. And like I say, it brings me to tears every time I read it. And I couldn't thank him more because he helped Dark Cloud on Naked Creek, this new version, be so much better than it was.
Well, I am so excited to get my hands on a copy, but I won't do the Kindle. I want the real copy. I want the real copy.
I also want to read the Foundling because we also know and write with Linda, and
Yes.
Yes.
everybody knows and loves Linda, I guess.
I
Linda's
know
kind of
y'all
universal
right.
love.
Yeah. Yeah, I know y'all right with her because, like I say, I'm not gonna spill any beans about anything, but I did read something that y'all worked on together, and I gotta tell you, I was blown away um, by the introduction, how this secret project came to be,
Well, thank
and I tell you, talented women, and it's a hell of a project.
thank you.
You're
We
very
have
welcome.
Elizabeth to thank.
Oh,
So
That is a beautiful, beautiful intro.
it really
yeah,
is.
I
That's
And
agree. Mm.
well, we want to thank you so much for joining us today. We could go on forever, but
we could go
we
on
can't.
forever, and I'm hoping we can have you back.
Yeah.
Uh, if you'd be up for that, I certainly would. It's fascinating, and I didn't ask half of what I wanted to, but of course, we don't want to make it a 12-hour video.
And you know
Right.
what? I did not have an inkling of that I would actually talk this much. So
See?
y'all are so kind and made me feel so comfortable,
Good.
with my voice and with sharing some of my life with you that I actually talked and I enjoyed it. And y'all
Good.
did ask for 2 weird facts. So
Oh, yeah, we'll get
do
to
we
those.
have time for that?
Well,
Oh,
yeah,
of course, we
he was
always
just saying,
have to end with the
Okay.
best thing I learned this week.
yeah, we will end with that in a second, Cindy.
Okay. Okay.
So we have a protocol.
Okay. We
So
cannot
we
veer from that.
and then there's no way you would know it, but then Elizabeth's going to tell hers, I'm going to tell mine, and then you'll tell
Okay.
yours.
All right.
So, Elizabeth,
Oh, it's so the best thing I learned this week is not the original best thing I wrote you that I learned, because I don't, oh, I do remember that was something about making plastics that were, but I don't remember it, sorry. What I am going to tell you is I'm reading the most amazing book called Entangled Life. It's about mycology, mushrooms, and not only are all these root connections underground, creating this wood wide web where plants can talk to each other, but in every individual leaf, there's dozens of different species of of fungal connections in each leaf of every plant that are
really?
unique. Yeah,
I
that are unique.
love
Wow.
that.
And
Wow.
I had no idea. So
I love it.
We'll put a link to that book in the below as well.
yes,
So
I will
that
put a link. It's
good.
a fascinating book. Oh my gosh. And you will
That's
learn so much on every page.
and retain that much of this
Well,
at this
I don't
age. I
know what
retain
you'll
so much less,
retain,
but I'll
unless you
enjoy
have
it.
a lot of fungal connections in your brain that maybe
Oh,
you
I
will.
wish I had. Well, I don't, because
I
that
think
probably
you
would
do.
kill me.
No, I
But
think we all have fungus in us, different,
we do,
which,
I'm sure.
I mean,
Um,
bad fungus, not like
yeah,
evil.
not bad. No bad. No, no, yeah. So mine isn't really this week. I was just I was looking at all these science things that are cool and all that, but I realized that the thing that has kept me kind of going the last month and a half or so with everything going on in the world is, it sounds crazy, but watching the eaglets growing up in Big Bear, California. There are eagle cams throughout the country. That's the closest one to where I live. And just watching this beautiful nest over the lake and the mother and father coming and going. And they always look so fierce. They look so angry all the time. I don't blame them actually for being angry. Um, but they're watching these little tiny things that are now almost the size of full grown eagles. It's amazing. And they've just been so restful and peaceful and beautiful. So that's my good thing. How
Sounds
about
Link
you,
beautiful.
below,
Cindy? You, Cindy, huh?
link below.
Mm.
Yes. Link below. Yes, yes. It's really good.
My
Thank you.
turn.
Your turn, Cindy.
um, something that I just learned today that you probably maybe you already know, and there's no link for it or anything, but my son asked me, Mom, do you know where artificial vanilla originally came from. And I'm like, oh dear, what am I going to approve of this? What is it going to be? And he goes on to tell me that it was from the scent glands of beavers located near their anus. So that's no longer practiced, luckily. And then Boomer has a factoid that he wants to share with y'all.
Oh.
That he is this 90-pound brute of a muscly dog, but he refuses to go potty outside unless you remain outside with him. And he will make sure you do, because if you are tempted to walk away, to answer a phone, to do anything, he'll turn and look like, Mom, where do you think you're going? I've not done my business yet. So you have to stay out there with him like he's a big old baby. And then this isn't a weird fact, but it's something new to me. My son Elijah recently married his fiancee Jonatas, and he's from Brazil, so it's a little bit of Brazilian culture. I noticed somebody in the shower, and then 2 or 3 hours later, I'm like, "Who's in the shower now?" And as it turns out, in Brazilian culture, they may take up to 5 showers a day. So I'm like, okay, I've learned something new. And now I know why that shower's all going so frequently. But anyway, just one of those cool things. And it's a joy to learn about his culture. And he's trying to teach me Portuguese. And I don't know. I'm 58 and it doesn't seem to be retaining, but they'll sneak and have me say something every now and then. I don't have a clue as what I'm saying, but they sure do laugh after I say it. So I think I might be saying something naughty. Oh, me.
That's always
This
interesting.
has been wonderful, just delightful. So
It sure has. And
thank
I was so nervous and just scared to death all morning. I think I was getting on the
you.
boys' nerves. And they're like, Mom, would you just calm down? It's going to be okay.
Well,
Yes,
now we know when
yes.
we have you back, you'll be all relaxed.
Okay. Well,
And you couldn't do any better relaxed. So, like I said,
well,
just are, you just come through so wonderful.
Yeah.
well, thank y'all so much for having me. And I look forward to coming back and hopefully with some big old news that I'll want to share with the world.
Good, good. Well,
So
Elizabeth,
thank you for being with us. And if you want to watch more of these interviews with fascinating people, please join our YouTube channel, MetaStellar YouTube, where we also read stories. And you can go to the metastellar.com to read speculative fiction or join our Patreon, because all the money goes directly to paying writers for fiction. Everything else is pure volunteer. So
and
thank
you
you.
can read Elizabeth's book, which is behind her. Her novel, Gods and Monsters, is available with her reading it on MetaStellar, or you can read it, and it is also available to purchase at this point in time. The lovely book, either Kindle or paperback. And we'd like to thank Maria Korolov for producing us. So thank you so much, everybody. Thank you again, Cindy. We'll look forward to speaking
Thank
with you and
y'all.
meeting you in person one day. And
Absolutely.
that's it. Thanks, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you next
Thank,
time.
thank y'all.
Bye.
Bye.